All right, my friends, welcome back. Thank you for joining me once again. In today's video, I want to share some food for thought with you that I hope inspires you in some way or another. Now, if this video does, please tap the like button and leave a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. And then consider sharing this with somebody that could possibly benefit by it. All right? Now, I have a question for you. And that is there something about your personality, or do you have a trait that you believe makes you somewhat different than a lot of other people? If so, what is it? Is it something positive? Is it something negative? It could go either way. If it's something negative, maybe we could change that by the end of this video. I'm hoping at least. Maybe you can't pin your finger on anything. And you're just thinking to yourself, I don't really know. I'm pretty much like everybody else. I'm pretty common. I can't think of anything that really stands out. We can change that too. Listen to this story. Think of an old man with a long silvery beard. He walks into a quiet little village that he's not acquainted with, and he makes his way to the town square and sits at the fountain. And as he's sitting there, he just watches as the townspeople rush right past him, almost as though they didn't even notice him. But his presence soon begins to seem mysterious to them, and they begin to murmur and whisper among themselves and say things like, "Who is he? Where did he come from? He's not one of us. Maybe we should be careful." The only one that was brave enough to approach him was a young boy named Theo. Theo walked right up to the old man, and he asked him, "Why are you sitting here?" The old man just kind of smiled at him and said, "I'm just waiting." "Waiting for what?" And the old man replied, "For someone to be curious enough to ask." You see, people observe a stranger in their midst, and they think they know his story. But you actually asked me, and that's what makes you different. Well, Theo took a shine to the old man, and he sat down beside him for hours and talked. And as a result of this, the next day, more townspeople joined them. And over time, this old man became a beloved part of the community, and he was able to share his stories and his wisdom with everyone. I guess you could say the moral of the story is that we shouldn't judge people by their appearance, because everyone has a story to tell, right? There are several things that stand out about this to me. The townspeople refused to acknowledge him at first. My parents always taught me that it's rude to not acknowledge someone's presence. Okay? Now, I know that there are times when that wouldn't necessarily apply, but as a rule, when you're in someone's presence, within a certain amount of feet of them, and it just lingers, it's wise to acknowledge their presence. Otherwise, it makes them feel bad. Okay? So I'm very thankful for my parents for teaching me that. Also, these people just assumed they had him figured out. That's kind of the definition of judging others. Looking at people, judging based on appearance, and thinking that we've got them figured out. But we haven't. It's okay to be curious, but let's do it without assumption. It's okay to observe, to see things around us, to acknowledge the anomalous, but never assume that we have, let's never assume that we have someone figured out. Take the time to acknowledge someone's presence, ask them questions, and another essential component to this is be willing to listen. You never know what hidden treasure might be out there. And I've talked to quite a few of them. I'm very thankful And this has not put me on a moral high ground, by the way, so do not read into that. But I'm very thankful that I had the father that I did. My father was a very inquisitive, very curious person. He was a get-to-know-you kind of guy. And I kind of naturally inherited that or learned that from being around him. And so I'm that way too. But it doesn't mean I'm above judging others, because we all do it. We all, it's kind of the easy way out. It's kind of if we don't want to think about something, if we want to take the fast track to navigating our way socially through things, it's easier to judge people. No fuss, no muss. We separate others, don't we? But you might not know what you're missing. Here's an example. I went to lunch the other day, just a couple days ago at Chili's. I was by myself, and I'll talk to anybody. But there was a gentleman, a bearded gentleman, that came and sat in a chair two seats down from me, and he was by himself likewise. He pulled his Kindle out, set it in front of him, and I looked over and noticed he was wearing a cap, a flat cap. I wear a lot of those. And I said to him, is that a Boston Scally cap? He said, yeah, it is. And so we started talking about the different Boston Scally caps that we have. And so I asked him also what he was reading. I'm always curious about that. And so we talked about literature, our favorite authors, our reading habits, how we approach things, how we think. And that was fun. And then I started talking to him more about him, like what he used to do or what he does do. It turns out he is a retired professional opera singer. He has traveled all over the world. I guess he did that for 20 years over in Europe. He lived 3 months out of the year in, I think it was Budapest. He lived 3 months out of the year in Budapest, and the rest of the year in Stockholm. Very interesting guy. And when we talked about books that we reread, I brought up Candide by Voltaire, and he said, "Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I actually played Professor Pangloss, which is a character in Candide. I played Professor Pangloss on stage. He taught me all about the opera and why opera singers stand where they stand on stage. And he looked at me and said, a person of your build, a man of your build and your height would be a baritone." And he is 5'6", and he said that tenors are usually like under 5, like 5'8" and under. And tenors are usually the hero, or at least the hero of the story in an opera is generally the tenor. And he was talking all about this. It was just the most fascinating thing. He told me when he was, we're the same age, by the way. We're the same age. He's from Lakeland, but he traveled all the world from a very young age. And he said that when he first went to the UK, that he was able to sustain himself by playing jazz piano in Irish pubs. Now, if I had never asked him anything, I would have looked at him and sized him up completely different. I even told him, I said, I would have never figured you for an opera singer. It's not what I picture in my mind, right? But what do I know? That's the whole point. What do we know? We don't know as much as we think we do. Be curious without assumptions. I have loads and loads of stories of people I've met who have told me things that I consider absolutely priceless. But I still have to remind myself not to be so judgmental and not to assume that I've got people figured out. I hope that's meant something to you. I hope I've made my point well. And I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to repeat this. If you're curious enough to ask, if you're polite enough to acknowledge, if you're smart enough to listen, it's going to set you apart. It's going to make you different than a lot of other people. Think about that. All right, guys, I'll catch you on the next one. In the meantime, be wise.